Hey,
Hey, how's it going?
good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Trying to open up all my documents again since I had to restart everything.
Oh, I bet that's fun. I think you can go into Chrome and say just like reopen
Reopen.
recent. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so before we start, I do want to mention, so I've been really sick lately, so I might have to like unpromptedly just get up and like walk out for a minute. But I'll try to avoid that.
That's fine. I totally understand being sick.
Yeah. I guess we can get started. I did see your post on Facebook about attempting to change your mind, which I thought was a fun challenge. Um,
Yeah, so I want to do debates in the future where I post a topic and then someone just tries to change my mind on it because I could always be wrong on topics like these.
Sure. Okay, cool. Well, I'll just kind of give a quick thing about, why I agree with this resolution. First, I'll start with the definition of chronically homeless, which I'm just using the definition of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and they define them as people who have experienced homelessness for longer than 1 year, or at least 4 episodes in a 3-year period that total to 1 year, and have an assessed disabling condition. And that those conditions can include mental illness, alcoholism, and drug addiction. So, aside from the moral conversation, because I think everybody kind of has a different perspective on the moral aspect of like capitalism and who ends up, in poverty and who ends up being rich and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's expensive. It is a burden on society to have homeless people. And this is because of their repeated use of emergency rooms, hospitals, jails, psychiatric centers, all that kind of thing. Crisis services that cost the public more than providing housing and supportive services. And we know that just because where it's been implemented, we see that it's a lot more cost effective to provide their housing and to give them the support that they need. And they use all these emergency services for lots of reasons. Being out on the street makes them much more vulnerable to, getting sick or being attacked or, all sorts of things. They're at higher risk for needing emergency services, not to mention the fact that, they're targeted by police and put in jail all the time, because loitering or you can't sleep outside or, being in a park, after hours, things like that. And more than anything, we see that providing housing and supportive services, right? Because these, they have something that they need to deal with in order to reintegrate to society. It helps them to achieve long-term housing. First of all, housing stability, obviously, because they have a house. But it also enables them to actually improve their health and well-being. They can kind of rebuild themselves. And this makes a lot of sense if you look at, right, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If at the very base level, we need food, water, shelter, right? And, if when you're homeless at all times, you're kind of on, in survival mode because you don't have one of your basic needs, which is shelter. And, once you have that unconditionally, so without having to worry about, losing it because you've relapsed or because you're not making enough to pay rent or whatever, if you don't have that worry, then you can focus on the very next level, which is, safety and security, which includes, health, employment, kind of family, social stability. And that's why we see this work where it's been tried. So that's just a very basic kind of off the top, like what my reason for supporting this is. So I'm curious to hear your side.
So I think our differences come from a fundamental different view of what government's role should be. So I have a view that the government should be in the business of protecting life, liberty, and property, and then a very limited view on protecting those things. So basically, government's role is to protect other people from infringing on your rights. Is my kind of limited view of government. And so this providing permanent housing, while from like a moral perspective, I can absolutely see why this would be a benefit morally. But I don't think the government is in the business of morals. I think that I like to quote James Madison of government's best state, it's a necessary evil. And so I don't know that this huge increase in spending, because it would be costly. I don't have. Do you have figures on how much something like this would cost to implement in America?
Well, it has been implemented in Utah, for example. It's half the cost. No, a little less than half the cost of the emergency services that are utilized by the homeless. So, I mean, yeah, it's an investment, but it's significantly less costly investment.
And then I have a question about permanent housing. When you say permanent, do you mean that this homeless person could stay there for the rest of their life if they choose?
I think that's how it works. Like, I think there's no conditional, like, requirement, like or anything like that. I think so long as you need the housing, you get the housing.
So I could see that having a nice long-term cost, but do you think that, like, logically it would open the door to abuse of that? Because if you have a housing situation where they go, okay, if I go homeless for 1 year, the government will set me up and let me live for the rest of my life. We've seen welfare abuse in America running rampant, and I feel like this would only open the door to more welfare abuse.
Okay. I think that's a sort of fair question to raise. I mean, I have a very particular opinion about this just in terms of housing in general in America, but I think that concern is not relevant to this conversation because it's only for so in order to qualify as a chronically homeless person, it's not just being homeless for a year, you have to have a disabling condition. So unless, yes,
well, someone you listed alcoholism, and there's a lot of alcoholics, and that could very easily be abused. I see this only opening the door to more welfare abuse instead of less.
I mean, I think if an alcoholic wants to make use of this, I don't so much see, like, I don't think that the risk of an alcoholic abusing this program kind of outweighs the people who need it the most. I mean, if it were up to me, I kind of like, there's a whole other discussion to be had about this, but I do think that if we all just had housing or our very basic needs provided for, then we wouldn't need any other programs to kind of help support society or anything like that. But that's a different conversation. But I don't particularly have a problem with that. I don't think there's a huge problem with anybody classifying as an alcoholic making use of the program. I also don't think that an alcoholic who has a house already or who has a home, which would most likely be much nicer than whatever the government would provide for this kind of program, would give up what they have just to live in a free place. I mean, maybe, but even still, I don't think that that abuse.
I don't think that this situation would actually want to, by it being permanent, I don't think this would actually improve the standard of or a person's drive to become a better person. So, like, let's toss out abuse. I still think that's a huge issue, but tossing that out, if you are a chronically homeless individual, those types of people, while they're in desperate need, like, you have that innate desire or drive to better yourself in some way or get out of that hole, whether or not it's possible, whether or not there's limitations to it. But if you just hand them that ability of, like, we're giving you housing, we're giving you welfare for food and things like that, that's going to cut down on someone's innate drive to better themselves. So what you're going to see, and what you see right now in welfare housing right now, is people aren't getting out of it. And a lot of that is because, well, if I'm having everything provided for me, it may not be the nicest things, but I don't have these needs. Why would I better myself? And so I think that with a permanent housing situation, you're going to see people not having that drive to succeed and become better. It's just like a human nature kind of thing.
So I disagree on several things there, and I also think that you're confusing welfare with permanent housing, because I don't think that the program implemented. I think the program's called Housing First, and the supportive services that are kind of listed as included in that package, I don't think include, you know, free food or, you know, like a car. You know, they just don't give you a bunch of things. They don't give you income or anything like that. It's simply, you know, the housing. And then because these people have mental illness or, you know, disabilities or substance abuse issues, services, you know, social workers, you know, rehab facilities, things like that. Those are the supportive services that I think is
well, given our current welfare state, they're already receiving, like they can already receive food and they can already receive some of these things. So what you're proposing is an addition to it. So what I'm saying is your proposal comes in tandem with these things, that is eliminating all of these persons' needs paying for by Big Brother and paying for by my tax dollars. And what I'm saying is these people, when they're getting all this stuff for free, they're going to have less of the drive to become more successful in life and make something for themselves in life when it's just being handed to them.
Well, in terms of the program, no. They're not just getting everything handed to them. People who are making use of this don't, it's not in addition to like welfare and all that stuff. They're completely different programs. But also, I think that your understanding of human nature is a little different than mine, because I think as human beings, we're all naturally ambitious people. We want to pursue, again, like hierarchy of needs, right? Once we've established our basic needs, we can move up to safety. Once we have that, we can work on ourselves, our self-esteem, our status in society. Most people have passions, have things that they enjoy doing. The people who've made use of this program have already shown to be, you know, reintegrated into society. They've gotten jobs. They're able to work and maintain jobs for longer because they don't have that constant fear of that conditional housing where they might lose everything, you know, at the drop of a hat, you know, from one day to another. Without that fear, people are able to maintain for longer stability, you know, whether it's in jobs, in relationships, in their health, recovery. And that's, I don't understand, because I hear this argument all the time. I don't understand this kind of assumption that people want to sit at home on the couch and watch TV all day. Like, that's not what people are actually like. Like, people want to do things. People have dreams, passions. They want to work. They want to, whether it's not, you know, whether or not they're earning as much as what society wants them to earn or whatever, you know, like that's not relevant. Like, everybody wants to be doing something that's on some level, and there's always an exception, but that's not representative of society as a whole. So even if they're making use of, you know, free housing or food vouchers or, you know, income, you know, supplemental income, that doesn't mean that they're not doing anything, that they're sitting at home on their butts all day. Like, those people still do attempt to work or to contribute to society in some way, like the vast majority of them. So I think when the numbers just, and human nature in general, I think maybe we just disagree on the nature of ambition and incentive and stuff like that, and motivation. I think that the fact that most people are like this warrants, you know, giving this kind of program legitimacy and implementing that, not just because, I mean, at the very least because it's the most cost-effective thing, but in general because I just don't think that this concern that people just become lazy and don't do anything, that's not really the case. Even in the programs that you are talking about, like welfare and things like that, it's not that people become lazy. A lot of them get trapped in a really unfortunate cycle because the welfare system doesn't, I don't think it's the most effective, like,
yes. I absolutely agree. So
but it's not a problem of incentive. It's a problem of, you know, they get stuck with kind of two bad options, like either income or minimum wage, but you can't really succeed in either one. So, but that's a different thing than housing.
with the welfare system, what it is they don't have a gradual decrease of your benefits. So basically, it's if you earn like you're earning like this much and you're getting this much welfare, right? And then you start earning this much and all the welfare goes away. So you're earning less once you cross over that gap. So welfare is intentionally designed to keep people trapped inside of it, and keep you more or less reliant on the government. It's sad, but it's true because it means a voter block at the end of the day. But this housing, all I see with that is just an increase to that. It's an increase to a trap of you being reliant on the government. What I see in this is not a we're going to provide you like I'm okay with like we're going to provide you housing for this period of time, but like you have to show that you've gotten a job, that you're like saving up money to get a rental. Like I could understand supportive services and housing to chronically. I can agree to the resolution if it doesn't say permanent.
Okay, so I guess I'm kind of wondering what you think the trap is here.
The trap is what we've seen in welfare is people don't actually
I guess what I'm saying is, sorry, before you move on.
No, you're fine.
Do you consider it a trap because they would never move out? Is that kind of your thing?
It's a trap because yes, they're probably not. Are there statistics of people leaving this permanent housing, building up and leaving it? Because if there's a high return rate of them flip it, like they stayed here for like 2 years and then they got a job, they got an apartment and their lives are better. I could absolutely concede to temporary housing because that makes sense. I understand to a level like, hey, this person needs like minor social safety nets. I can totally understand that because that's just what people need. But permanent housing, you're talking about funding someone cradle to grave and like almost like entire life. That if you had a large amount of people that you see as much welfare spending that we have right now, which you would agree almost that it's kind of out of control with our spending, what you're doing is you're tacking onto that, and that's just going to increase the spending that the government usually wastes inefficiently, and you're just going to see things getting worse, not better. And at the end of the day, like our welfare system as it stands hasn't overall helped the homeless or helped the poor in a huge way. It's kept them trapped and kept them down. And so I just don't see how increasing this welfare state would actually help them.
Okay. I guess, okay, so if it were up to me, if we got rid of like welfare in general, like welfare income supplements or food stamps or whatever, and this is, just bear with me for a second, but like if everyone who potentially needed permanent free housing could have access to permanent free housing, and yes, that would mean, crave to cradle, wait.
Cradle to grave. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Even if that were the case, even if, we had these situations where people were never moving out, if our only cost was providing housing to everybody, would that be an issue if it were cheaper, even if they never moved out? Because this is what I guess I'm trying to get at, is that because someone doesn't have to worry ever again about shelter, and without having to worry about rent, which, economically speaking, rent is supposed to be 30% of your income, right? That's like the ideal kind of ratio of how much you should be spending of your income. I don't know anybody who spends that much. I mean, like maybe, rich people, they don't have to worry about that kind of thing. But, for the majority of people, especially living in LA or London or, really expensive cities, rent is well over 50% of your income. And when you're spending that much just to have a roof over your head, things like healthy food or, minimum wage jobs even aren't an option. Like you can't, you just like so much, there's so much stacked against people who are trying to rebuild themselves when all of your concern has to, like all of your efforts are constantly making sure that you just don't lose the, small area that you sleep in, So if you never have to worry about that again, and people are, focused or have the opportunity to just be purely focused on, working, saving money, whatever, I think that that sets them up for a much more successful future. And the reason I don't necessarily think that people will just sit in their, free housing for eternity is that once people become successful, this is a capitalistic country and a very materialistic world. We like our stuff. So when people have excess money, they like to treat themselves. They like to upgrade. They like to have the nice next thing. So yes, I think a lot of people would make use of it. Especially poor people, and everybody, well, for sure, homeless people. Poor people might, give up whatever public housing or cheap rent that they're doing or paying to make use of it. But ultimately, once people start building themselves, rebuilding their lives, having their needs met, and actually being able to save money, being able to invest, being able to reintegrate it into the economy, then we'll see, them kind of by their own choice, invest in higher, real estate or just in the market in some way or another. I don't necessarily think that everyone's just going to stay in housing, because it's not like everyone's getting a mansion for free. You're just getting your basic needs.
Well, I've been looking, as you've been talking and listening, but I've also been looking at the conditions that these homeless people are living in Utah, and they're pretty awful. Utah's been cutting costs with these housing areas by cramming what should be 1,000-bed facilities and cramming 3,000 beds in them. An article from The Guardian is talking about it, about how they've been skewing numbers, and they are getting people into housing, but there's reports from these homeless people that saying that the conditions are almost worse inside these housing areas than they are out on the street. And so if Utah is the bastion of this, then these homeless people are living in some pretty bad conditions. But
I'd be interested to see, is that the housing first, or is that public housing? And because public housing in general, or assisted, what is it called? Basically low cost living. Yeah, those tend to have bad kind of reputation.
No, it's through the road home. That the state has required. The state has put these homeless people into their housing situations and created overflow.
I think those are shelters, though.
Yes, but this is what the article is saying is they've had overflow, and so they're putting these homeless people into these homes because they don't have enough for this, and so these homeless people that are supposed to be getting this help are living in bad conditions. But even again, if you my hinge on this argument is permanent. I don't think offering permanent housing is the solution. I think that if you offer temporary housing of, say, 5 years, where you have 5 years on or off, not necessarily consecutive. If you need to, if you build yourself up in 2 years and then you tragically fall back, you can come back to this for a couple more years. But if you have a temporary housing, it's more of an incentive of, look, I'm not going to have this housing forever. This gift isn't going to be mine forever. It's going to have more of a drive in a person that is self-interested, that has that survival instinct, as you're saying. If they have that drive of going, okay, I have 5 years here to get my crap together, to start working a job, saving up money for down payment on rent. I need to consider moving to an area with cheaper rent because I can't afford to live here, because LA, let's be honest, we don't all have to live in LA or New York City. I live at a suburban/rural area where rents can be very cheap in apartments, $150 a month, kind of cheap. So it's one of those things that if you do a temporary housing, which I can concede to, then you're helping out homeless people. We're getting them into housing. We're cutting costs of them using emergency services and things like that. But the temporary side of it adds a drive to succeed. And you could even have a wean-off program of we've taken away your housing, but we're going to give you a little bit of income so that you're still trying to do all right. And then if you wean them off of it, then they're more likely to be more successful. Would you agree to that?
No. First of all, temporary housing has time and time again shown to not work. It just doesn't work. first I want to ask kind of what your thoughts are on my interpretation of incentive and motive. So just keep that in mind for a second, because I don't think that they would stay in temporary housing forever. Not everybody, anyway.
Well, can we address that real quick so we don't I don't want to miss the line where we're talking.
Yeah.
I think that humans are naturally self-interested, so they have that we're all very selfish individuals by nature, and so we're looking out for our own benefits, not the benefits of others. In not in all situations, but we have a natural inclination to be selfish. And so through that, if you've been giving something, I kind of believe in that. If you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime, kind of idea of giving away things won't produce incentives for people to better themselves, but teaching them things and giving them temporary help will produce incentives. Does that make sense?
It does make, I get what you're saying, but I guess my question is, given that we do live in such a materialistic world and one where we're consuming everything all the time, if we are as self-interested as you say, don't you think that people, once they have a place to live, kind of go, hey, I kind of want that, I kind of want a TV, or I kind of want a car, or I kind of want that nice big house, or don't you think that's
yes? But in the current welfare state that we're seeing of people, they don't want.
But I want you to suspend belief for a second of put that welfare stuff aside, because I think you're making an assumption that isn't necessarily. You would have to assume that every single one of these chronically homeless people are making use of that that welfare system, which is a separate thing than permanent housing. So just if you separate those for a second, if you just say all that we're giving them is permanent free housing, do you think that eventually, once they've kind of maintained recovery from substance abuse, or they've gotten the therapy they need for their mental illness or whatever, and once they've maintained a steady job for a while, would you think that the next kind of natural step would be oh, okay, you know what, I kind of want this next thing for the next stage of my life?
You would think that, right? So yeah, no, that's kind of what someone might want. But if someone's giving me something, and I if someone keeps giving me that fish, I'm going to keep eating for that day. I'm not going to. You might have a slight desire to better yourself, but that requires a whole lot of work, and you're already being given this for free. So why would you? You are. It's like a socialism kind of thing. It's if I'm being given this, why would I work harder or produce more if I can still get this?
Because fancy mansion, that's the thing, is that we live in a society.
But we're not seeing. Okay, again, you say we can't talk about welfare, but this is a type of welfare. It is that's what it is, and so we have to look at.
I just don't want you to confuse it with the income supplement thing.
Okay, we're not. Well, let's look at the housing that is offered. But the thing is these welfare comes in big packages. So if you're getting the housing, you're getting the income. So with this,
but that's not how the program works.
But there are other welfare programs that are federal welfare programs, so they're getting that money anyway if they're in that housing. So yes, they do kind of come together. So unless you're talking about repealing this income, you have to deal with the income that they're getting. So it's kind of hard to say that we're just talking about the housing when there are other
factors.
Hard
because if you look at any of the interviews, or any of the things that, if you read about the people who are making use of this, they're not also getting supplemental income. They're getting jobs. All the numbers show that these people are reintegrating into society. They're working. It's not also, they're not all just single, individual people. A lot of them have families. They have people to support. So it's not just, we're giving this one person everything they could possibly want in the world, and they could just sit at home all day and eat and watch TV and not have a care in the world. That's not how this works. And I think it's just incorrect to say that all these people are also have supplemental income. And I think that forcing those two issues together really distracts from the fact that this particular initiative works.
Well,
so whether or not the other one is replaced or reformed or canceled or whatever is something else.
I understand, but if we're looking at implementing on a national scale, which is what this resolution states. We're looking at implementing permanent housing on a national scale. You have to deal with the other welfare benefits that these people are going to receive. That's just a fact. You have to deal with that because you're talking about increasing this welfare state. And before we increase, we have to look at how it would work in tandem with other welfare policies that people are getting. I feel like that's pretty fair. If I'm adding on to something, if you're talking about adding on to this state, well, will it work well with these other benefits that people are already receiving? I think that's perfectly fair.
Well, I guess it may be a fair conversation. I'm not as familiar of how it would work in tandem because at least in my readings, it's not been a problem. Again, like I said, the people who've made use of this are working again, rehabilitating themselves, keeping, stable,
And from the articles I'm reading, they're living in bad conditions.
Well, no, what you were reading was about shelters, because when there aren't enough free housing for homeless people, and so the overflow continues, people still are using shelters.
So wouldn't we see that on a national scale?
Well, no, that just means you need more free housing. There isn't enough.
What they're talking about is they're cutting. It's less expensive, but think about the cost to build all of that free housing. That would be really expensive.
Not more expensive than the cost that we currently incur for maintaining.
What are the cost comparisons? What are the numbers?
The numbers are something like $16,000 per person for free housing, and $40,000 per person for using our emergency facilities, jails, hospitals, and things like that.
So,
which are recurring costs, by the way, because they're constantly, arrested, or constantly end up in the emergency room, or constantly end up in detox centers. Like, it's not just like, oh, one-time usage. They're
did you say it's $16,000 for the housing
per person? Yeah, it's per. It's not.
So you're talking about, like, we're talking about services too as well. Is that talking about like the recovery services you're saying also cost a whole lot of money?
No, but what I'm saying is you're asking the comparison. So the entire housing and services, $16,000 per person, and then homelessness, just unchecked, $40,000 per person.
Okay, I'm trying to find the source that you have because I just wanted to look at the cost. I can't seem to find.
Let me see if I can pull it up. I saw mine are closed. So if you just Google cost of homelessness in America, it's like the first thing that pops up.
Well, I'm looking at how much does the Utah cost. That's what I'm looking at. Okay. I'll concede that it's pretty expensive for the state to offer all those free things. But we see upwards of, like, we've seen cases of welfare abuse of millions of dollars being stolen from food stamps and things like that. And so I also believe that, man, like, that selfishness is going to want to be greedy with the government handouts that they're getting. And so with permanent housing, I can totally concede that it's beneficial. I can almost concede.
Oh, that's why. Okay, sorry, we got off the rest. That's why I was going to ask the question, and then because my next thing that I was going to say was okay, for temporary housing. So why this is a problem, why it doesn't work. So if you just kind of think about, also, I hope you're not just thinking about like any random person who can come and make use of the program. But so imagine somebody with substance abuse. Like, drug addiction is a pretty hard thing to recover from, and if you're given that 5-year time limit, it's not an incentive to recover from drug addiction. I mean, like, the incentive is always there, is recover from drug addiction. That's the purpose. If you want to recover, that's your incentive, and that's it. But putting a time limit on is why so many people end up homeless all over again. Every time they've tried conditional housing, every time they've been cut, relapsing or whatever, they lose their housing and they're out on the streets again. So that's why it doesn't work. If you don't have to worry about your time limits or conditional housing, then you're just focused on yourself and living your life. So rebuilding yourself, whether it's your health, your social status. If you lose your permanent housing for whatever reason, that sends you back to the street and you have to start from square one. So I guess
what I guess I would propose with this is, again, I just don't see how permanent has more of a benefit. I'm sorry, but with temporary, if you had a system, and I agree our welfare system is broken, so I'm trying not to use our current welfare system as a litmus test of how it should be. But if you had a system where, like, okay, 5 years, you have free housing, like, we're going to take care of you, we're going to help you out. But on that 6th year, we might take away your housing, but like we'll give you a little bit of supplemental income to help you with your rent. And that'll last for maybe like another year, year and a half. And then like your benefits are just sloping down to where you're gradually like getting them into readjusting to real life. If we allow just permanent housing, then what you're going to see is people innately, like, you're going to see a lot of people abuse this system. If you make it temporary, the abusers can only abuse it for so long, and the people that are genuinely trying to build themselves up have a system that is building them up and weaning them off the program, and they'll be built up. Because these abusers that just want to relapse into drugs over and over again, like drug addiction, I'm not saying it's not horrible, but at the end of the day, like, I believe in like limited government, and of like, if you want to go do drugs, you should be allowed to go do drugs. That's your choice, that's your life. And so I don't see why the government owes you anything because you made big life mistakes. Like, I agree in minor temporary safety nets because, like, okay, yeah, you made mistakes, let's temporarily help you out. But I don't see why I'm an alcoholic, now give me housing for life because I screwed my life up. At the end of the day, I believe in limited government where we go, okay, you have the freedom. This is America. You have the freedom to make your life choices. But if you screw up your life and make horrible decisions, then you have to eat it. You have to deal with what you have created. At some level, you have to face consequences.
I kind of wish we had more time for this, but so for getting into the conversation of like drug addiction and having that, so I didn't realize that what you meant by having people abuse the system is that these are just drug addicts who want a place to crash.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there are some, but there are also some people that just want to abuse it in general. Like, there's all types of abuse from it. So we're seeing that in do
you think that the people who would abuse this, or who would, even if there were people who, made it so that their conditions would qualify them for free housing, do you think that that would not be worth housing all the homeless people that are currently out on the streets, given that first it would be cheaper, it's the morally right thing to do, and it's empirically more effective, right? But I guess I don't understand, given that it works, and like all these things.
We're seeing a temporary thing. This policy's only been in effect for a couple of years. It hasn't been in effect for that long. We haven't seen the long-term effects of Utah's housing, and we're already seeing that right now it's not going too hot. Like, they've decreased housing, but they're like sleeping on prison cots in not that great of housing. Thousands of them are. I wouldn't call that a huge improvement. Now,
well, you're also misrepresenting, because you're talking about people who are in shelters, not people who are in house.
I understand, but they can't put them in housing, so they're putting them into shelters. So that's what we're going to see if we implement that realistically nationwide. So I'm not misrepresenting at all, because that's what Utah is doing for their program. That's not misrepresenting at all when that's what they're doing.
Well, no, but all that means is that they need more housing for their homeless. That's all that means. They need more supply.
Yes, but
it's
not happening that much, and these people are still living in really bad conditions.
Right.
So how is this an improvement?
Well, first of all, it's the biggest decrease in homelessness that the entire country has seen, like that any state has seen, in the implementation of any kind of program. Second of all, it's the first state to do it, and it's their first time around. So I would say that they claim it's like a 90% decrease in homelessness or something like that. That's an enormous drop. And the same program has been implemented in Finland and Denmark. Same exact things happen there.
Much smaller countries than us, and they're also rummaging in debt.
Well, but the fact that it works is...
It doesn't work if you're running out of other people's money. At the end of the day, you're going to start running out of other people's money.
Well, if
Because
it's a
at the end of
cheaper
the day,
program, you're not going to run out of people's money. If we can afford, or if we're, paying to, take care of the people who are homeless by paying for their emergency services, we can definitely afford to provide their housing. So even if let's just say that these people abuse it, they stay in there forever permanently, and they never move up in the world or whatever, it's still cheaper for society. Given just that alone, wouldn't that be a reason enough, like to unburden society from the cost of homelessness?
Let me ask one question real quick. Is that $16,000 a cost per year?
I think it's an annual cost.
Because there are 564,000 people that are homeless in America, right? Times 16,000. We're looking at 90 million. Or no, that's another zero I need to add. Oops. We're looking at like just an estimate of using your numbers and using the homeless people numbers. We're looking at $902 million a year.
Okay, so now multiply the same number of homelessness by 40,000 people.
It's expensive, but we're not. But what you're seeing is that is your 40,000 an average for all of America?
What do you mean? It's
40,000. Is that just in are these statistics just coming from Utah? Utah's cost to comparison to that?
No, I think this is a national. I'm looking at the HUD numbers. I think it's a national number. It's $40,000 per person in nationwide.
I'm interested just to see that source too. It fascinates me. But what I'm seeing is like it's an expensive program either way you cut it. But it's not more expensive than the status quo, is what I'm saying. But it's $16,000, and these people are sleeping on cots.
That's not what's happening.
What's happening? You can say that they haven't built the housing yet, but there's $16,000, and these people don't have housing. They're sleeping in prison cots. So
10% of the people who are left are sleeping in prison cots. Let's just say that what you're saying is true. 10% of homeless people are living in those unfavorable conditions.
No. That's not the 10%. No, the 90% includes people sleeping on those cots. There are 10% on the streets. That is what's happening.
You're reading, or whatever you skimmed over, link it, because I
will. What it's talking about is that Utah doesn't have that housing yet, and so what they're doing is to get people off the streets. They're putting them in those shelters, and they're calling that getting them off the streets. And
but that's not permanent house. That's not the permanent housing.
But that's what they're calling it. That's what Utah is.
There's maybe a misrepresentation of marketing or whatever in terms of exact numbers, sure. That doesn't take away from the fact that the program, when the actual implementation of permanent housing is working, the people who are getting permanent housing are succeeding. So the people who don't have it yet,
they're in shelters.
Yes, okay. So if there's way too many people to house, or a lot of people that haven't gotten housing yet, sure, there are facilities and stuff that are trying to take care of that, but that's, again, shelters don't work. Those overflow areas are actually costing us more than the housing.
I don't think they're costing us more than the housing. It's cheaper to put 3,000 people in a warehouse on prison mats than it is to put them in a house. Like that's just a fact. I'm not saying it's right, but that's just a fact. It's cheaper to do that. Now, what I'm saying is that $16,000 could be skewed because we're putting them in very cheap shelters and putting them on prison cots and overflowing those things. I feel like you're seeing numbers skewed because of the amount of overflow in those housing.
I think you found one article in
I found three different articles talking about this, and they're coming from pretty liberal, like left-leaning sides that would be pro this. They're saying they're not doing a good job with it, not spending enough money. So,
sure. I know which articles you're talking about. What they're talking about is the fact that there's some kind of criticism on the exact number of reduction that people are classifying as, or that people are using to classify the reduction numbers. They're not arguing that the program doesn't work. What they're arguing is that it hasn't solved 100% of homelessness yet, and the people who are still homeless are utilizing shelters and things like that. That's
not what the articles I'm reading are saying, and I'll post them down for you to read. Absolutely, but for me, again, I see a solution, not what our current welfare state is doing. Just in closing, is I see a temporary system being most successful, not necessarily like very short-term temporary, but a nice long-term weaning them off the system. That way we're giving you the help you need, but we're letting you succeed as an individual.
Okay, yeah, and yeah, I guess I'll close saying that, you know, we've tried things like that. They don't work for very many reasons. People relapse and end up on the streets again. This Housing First initiative has been proven to work. It's the most successful thing that's happened so far, and I say improve on that rather than keep on wasting money and time trying things that don't work and end up leaving people in terrible conditions. Thanks.